Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into the science-backed secrets from the book Learn Like a Pro, so you can learn anything way more effectively without just working harder.
All right, let me ask you something. Does this sound familiar? You spend hours and hours studying, you're poring over your books and your notes, but then the next day, it feels like it's all just gone. It's a super common frustration, but the fix isn't what you probably think it is.
And that brings us to a simple but really powerful truth. See, learning effectively isn't some gift you're born with, like having a math brain or something. It's a skill. It's a set of techniques that anyone, and I mean anyone, can master. It's all about how you learn, not just for how long. Okay, here's our game plan for becoming a pro learner. First, we're going to tackle the biggest hurdle. Then, we'll get into how your brain actually works. After that, we'll look at the best study habits, build up a toolkit of powerful strategies, and finally, we'll wrap it all up with the one master skill that holds everything together.
So, let's kick things off with the biggest monster in the room for pretty much any learner, that constant nagging feeling of procrastination. How in the world do you get yourself to just sit down and start?
You know, the reason we procrastinate is actually fascinating. And it's all happening inside your brain. It's not about being lazy. When you just think about doing something you don't like, your brain literally registers a little flicker of pain. And of course, your brain's first instinct is to go, nope, let's do something else.
So how do you get around this, this brain pain? Well, with a brilliantly simple technique called the Pomodoro. It is an absolute game changer for tricking yourself into that state of deep focus. And the method itself could not be simpler. By just setting a timer for 25 minutes, you're not committing to this huge, awful task. You're just committing to 25 minutes. Anyone could do that, right? And the secret sauce here is the reward, a short, totally guilt-free break. This little loop hijacks your brain's reward system, and suddenly you're focusing on the pleasure of the coming break, not the pain of the task.
Okay, so that break is your reward, right? But something else, something really powerful, is happening during that downtime. You're actually tapping into a totally different way that your brain thinks, and it's the key to cracking really tough problems. Think about it like this. Your brain basically has two different gears. You've got your focus mode for when you're concentrating hard on something you kind of already know. But to learn something brand new or to get unstuck, you have to shift into diffused mode. This is that relaxed, mind-wandering state where your brain makes all these new, surprising connections in the background. It's where those aha moments come from. Now, the funny thing is, you can't just flip a switch to turn on this diffuse mode, but you can invite it to show up. The trick is to step away from the problem and do something that uses a totally different part of your brain, something almost mindless. This is exactly why your best ideas always seem to pop up in the shower or when you're out for a walk. It's because you finally stopped trying so hard.
Okay, so here's a super practical way to use this, especially on something like a test. Try what's called the hard start technique. You begin with the toughest problem, just to get it loaded into your brain. The second you get stuck, switch to an easier one. Now, while your focused mind is busy with the easy stuff, your diffuse mode is quietly chipping away at that hard problem in the background. It's like having a secret coprocessor.
All right, so we've got our focus handled, we know how to take effective breaks. Now, let's talk about the single biggest mistake that almost everyone makes when they actually sit down to learn something. This right here. This is probably the biggest learning trap of all. These passive habits, like highlighting text or just rereading your notes over and over, they feel so productive, don't they? But they're actually incredibly ineffective. They create something called a fluency fallacy. The words look familiar, so you trick yourself into thinking you actually know the material. Real learning is active. It's a bit of a struggle, and that struggle is what builds strong new connections in your brain. And the antidote, the single most powerful form of active learning, has a name: active recall. It's the simple but effortful act of pulling information out of your own memory, instead of just passively looking at it on a page. That little bit of struggle to remember, that's what cements the information in your long-term memory. So what does this actually look like? It's really simple. Anytime you would normally just reread a chapter, stop, close the book, and try to summarize the main ideas from memory. Anytime you'd glance at a solved math problem,
cover it up and try to solve it yourself first. It's going to feel harder, because it is. And that effort, that's the whole point.
All right, active recall is huge. But what else should be in our Pro Learner Toolkit? Let's look at a few more game changers.
First up, you have got to fight that urge to cram. I mean it. The science on this is crystal clear. Spacing out your learning is way, way better for long-term memory. 1 hour a day for 10 days will always beat a 10-hour cram session. Your brain needs that downtime to build and strengthen those connections.
Second, you got to mix things up. Instead of just drilling one type of problem over and over again in a block, you should interleave, which just means mixing different types of problems all together in one study session. Again, it feels harder, but that's the magic. It teaches your brain not just how to solve a problem, but which strategy to pick in the first place. That's a much deeper level of understanding.
And finally, the most overlooked learning tool of all, sleep. Seriously, getting a full night's rest is absolutely non-negotiable. It is not wasted time. Sleep is when your brain is doing some of its most important work. It's consolidating memories, it's strengthening the connections you built during the day, and it's literally washing out toxins. Don't skip it.
Okay, so we've got this awesome collection of tools, right? Pomodoros, diffuse mode, active recall, spacing. But how do you actually manage it all? How do you know which tool to pull out of the toolbox and when? Well, that brings us to the master skill that every single pro learner develops.
And that master skill is called metacognition. All that really means is thinking about your thinking. It's your ability to be the coach, not just the player. It's stepping back and asking yourself, hey, is what I'm doing actually working? Could I do this a better way?
And this isn't some vague concept. It's a real, practical, 4-step loop you can use. First, you figure out the task. Then, you make a plan, you pick your tools. Then you actually do the work. And here is the most critical part. You constantly check in on your progress, and if what you're doing isn't working, you change your strategy. That right there is the feedback loop of every expert on the planet.
And really, that's what this is all about. Becoming a pro learner isn't about finding one single magic trick. It's a process. It's about slowly, gradually building up your mental toolbox. And, just as importantly, learning how to think critically about which tool to use and when.
Look, all of these strategies are powerful, but they're useless unless you actually put them into practice. So I'll leave you with one final metacognitive question to ask yourself. After everything we've just talked about, what is the one thing you're going to change about how you learn, starting today? Thanks for watching.